Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. And I have another fantastic guest for you today. His name is Michael Harris, and he is an international best-selling author, business strategist, a heavily meditated and avid yoga master, an outdoor junkie, and storyteller. He is also the survivor of multiple health issues, including a near-fatal water skiing accident, addictions, and a prognosis that he would die from vascular disease at 27 years old. Michael, wow, what an intro. Thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Cheryl, it's really great to be here. And I want to tell you, before I go on any shows, I always like to listen to some of the other episodes and to see who's been on. And, going all the way back to John Giordano, I believe was his name.
Yes.
He was a mobster and he got sobriety. It was a show all the way back, I think in 21, the end of like November 21. And I just look at some of these, including your last show with Tom Cronin, and talking about the movie The Portal. And it's just like, wow, these are amazing, amazing people. It's like, I want your phone numbers to all these people because I want to talk to them myself. Because it's just like, it was so great to listen. So any listeners there, go back and look at some of these other episodes because there's some really great shows in there, Cheryl.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate it. I truly am honored to have met so many wonderful people with incredible stories, personal empowerment, overcoming obstacles. And I think it really it lifts my spirit. And I think it does that for the audience as well. So we're really excited to hear about your story. The first thing I want to ask you, there's so much to your story and there's so much I did not include in the intro, but I really want to know, who told you that, or who gave you the prognosis that you would die from vascular disease at 27?
Yeah, it was 1986, and I had been stumbling around a little bit on a cane. I thought that I had some spinal issues or some nerve issues, and I went to a chiropractor, and I was living in Portland, Oregon at the time, and she said, well, you need to go see a vascular specialist. And I didn't really know much what a vascular specialist was, what it really meant, but I ended up at OHSU, which is Oregon Health Sciences University. And by the time I got there and they were doing the initial exam, the nurse was, she didn't even really, she just looked at me and she called the doctor in and it ended up that my right leg was 100% blocked, atherosclerosis. My left leg was 65% blocked. My right foot was pretty red and purple and all of that. And my blood panels, all normal. Cholesterol was 142. All the other LDL, HDL, homocysteine, all the other indicators were very much in the normal range. Yet I still had authorized plaque in my arteries.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the doctor looked at me and he looked at my foot again and looked at me and he said, we're probably going to have to take your leg.
Oh my God.
So we'll, and I didn't even know I had a problem in my left leg. I just thought it was my right leg because the pain that was in my right leg was so great. I didn't even experience or recognize the pain in my left leg. But Cheryl, this was also, and I'll come back a little bit more and mention how I came through that and how, again, that was 1986 and this is 2022. So that's 36 years ago now, and I'm still here. And they said I was not going to be. But it was at the end of about 15 years of drinking and partying and using some other substances that really started after another health incident that I had, a water skiing accident in 1971. And I was a hotshot water skier and just a hotshot kid. I just won the club championship at Portland Golf Club, the junior championship, and, just very, very active, and was doing a beach landing one day and ended up hitting the beach. And, it was just like getting the wind knocked out of you. I mean, most of us have had that experience, but it seemed like that times 10 or that times 100, because it was just the impact was so heavy at the time. But initially, the local hospital, it was a small local hospital that I went to. They said that I was okay, that I was bruised up and such. But that night ended up going back to Port. Actually, I was throwing up blood. I was 12 years old.
Oh
Mom
my
drove us
God.
back to Portland, which was about an hour and a half drive, and went to the doctor. The next thing I knew, I was waking up after a coma, being in a coma for 10 days. And they had removed 60% of my liver, my gallbladder, cracked ribs, collapsed lung. I'm looking at your face right now. In coma, 21 blood transfusions. And here I am lying in the bed. Again, just coming back from a coma and a near-death experience.
Oh my God. So I'm a medical person. I don't know if you knew that in my background, but I was a respiratory therapist for 17 years before I got my master's in PT. So I'm picturing this, and I worked in a trauma unit for quite a while. And just the fact that you survived it, the fact that you survived the drive back up to Portland after hitting the beach like that, because even in my mind's eye, I'm thinking of the forces as you hit the beach. I'm surprised that that didn't kill you.
Well, I think a lot of people were surprised. Like even the doctor said, Dr. Campbell, afterwards, and I was under his care for quite a while. And I said, well, how many stitches? He said, we stopped counting. He says, but I didn't do anything. I didn't save you. He said, God saved you. He said, I just stitched you up. I mean, there's thousands of stitches. You had more stitches inside than you did external. Because I mean, I'm zipped up from my waist to my armpit. And then a couple of other scars too from drainage and that stuff.
Oh, so how long were you in the hospital?
Well, I was in the hospital just about a month. I could have been there longer, but Dr. Campbell wanted me at home. So he sent me home, and he would come to the house every morning at about 5:30 a.m. as part of his rounds. And he would clean out my drain and that. He said, rather than just sitting in the hospital, let's put you at home. And that the surgery was early September of 71. As I was coming into 7th grade. And then I went back to school in January, but I was still under his care, and I still had a tube in the side of me for about 3 or 4 more months.
Jeez. I mean, that truly is a miracle that you survived. And I have to give him credit that Dr. Campbell sounds like he's a very smart person to not let you sit there and at 12 years old, especially in the hospital for a month. But to let you go home to your, familiar surroundings and stuff. But your parents must have been just like beside themselves.
Well, of course. And, it's interesting because like when I was in the coma and I was lying there, either a nurse or my mom would like put their finger in my hand and say, squeeze my finger. And of course, I couldn't move my hand at all at the time. But I could hear it. I had some awareness of them there. Now, not 100% awareness all the time, but there were times where I was aware.
Okay.
And so, my mom, was just happy that I came out of it and came out of it alive. But like I said, I mentioned the near-death experience. So let me briefly mention this.
Okay.
And it was right at the end of my coma, and I left my body and I was in a circle of what I call spirit. And there was a spirit there that's still around me right now. His name is Fred.
Fred?
His spirit guide name is Fred, right? Okay. And, he fits really well because he wears blue jeans and a red plaid shirt, and I live in the mountains of Central Oregon. So, I mean, he knew what he was doing. He knows what he's doing. And when I left the garden area, when I was out of my body and was coming back to my body, I did not want to come back. I wanted to stay where I was. And I was reaching out, saying, I don't want to go. And they said, well, you're not through yet. Wow. Well, here I am 51 years later,
Mhm.
And apparently I'm not through yet.
Mhm.
I'm still here.
Well, and it's nice to have you here. I'm glad that you're on this side of the earth.
Well, thank you. I'm glad I'm here too.
Jeez. Now, when you were comatose, were you on a ventilator or were you able to breathe on your own?
No, I was on a ventilator. I had tubes in every part of my body.
Oh my God. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so then take us
Along with the tubes in my arm too. Not
right.
just the regular needle IV, but the
Yeah.
tubes. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and chest tubes with the collapsed lung
Yeah.
and yeah, the whole thing. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And 70% of your liver they had to remove?
60, 65, right in
Wow.
there. Yeah. When I went back to write the book about it, I tried to get a hold of Dr. Campbell, but he was passing when I reached back out to him.
Mm.
So I wasn't able to talk to him again about it.
So take us back then to, okay, so you recovered from this. You're 12 years old. You went through this horrible experience. Um, what was your life like then? I mean, when you went back to school, everything was quote unquote normal for you again, or was it?
No,
Right.
because I still had the tube in my side. And, I went from the captain of the, teams to the last one that anybody wanted on the teams because I was a sick kid.
Mm-hmm.
I developed a lot of really self-doubt and a lot of anger. I was mad at God that I was
Mm-hmm.
back because I wanted to be there rather than here.
Mm-hmm.
And it really ended up triggering, by 15, 16 years old, I ended up being a pretty wild kid,
Mm-hmm.
smoking pot and drinking and trying to cover up that pain and that emotional pain that I was
Mm-hmm.
experiencing. And I even told my parents, I said, I may have healed physically, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
feel like I healed emotionally. And, they were just happy that their little kid was alive.
Right.
But I went on a tear, all the way up to that point of, 1986 to where the doctors were ready to cut off my legs.
So back in those days, I hate to put it that way,
That's
we're the
okay.
same age, so it's
The
okay.
first 30 years, yeah.
Yes, but even back then, when you said you knew that you felt like you had healed physically, but
Yeah.
then there's that emotional trauma and the psychological trauma of what you went through. And I think back then in that time frame, people weren't as concerned about healing the mind or not addressing, the impact that something like that would have on your mental health.
Yeah, that's a great thought. And it's very true that, because today, and we talked about it briefly before, the mind body aspect
Mm-hmm.
is part of really what I ended up diving into.
Mm-hmm.
And also recognizing some of what was happening with me, call it the first 30. But even
Mm-hmm.
like what's happening today, in my life today, not that I'm sick, I'm not sick today, but just understanding
Mm-hmm.
that deeper interplay that's going on within us.
Well, I think if you have that kind of understanding, that self-awareness, then you have the power to take appropriate action when something does go a little bit wrong, so things don't go terribly wrong. And
Yeah.
I really believe that, especially as we mature, we're way too willing to give that kind of, our own authority to somebody else, to the experts to say, hey, fix me.
Yeah. Very much. And I tried to do that several times.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, the response was, no, you have to fix yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Part of it was taken aback because back when in 86, when I first was diagnosed with vascular disease, I had FemPops, which you know what those are. It's essentially
Yes.
bypass surgery on both my legs, and it restored the blood flow. But within a month, I was back in the hospital with clots. And by the following year, 8 months later, they wanted to do more surgery because I had reblocked. And I was in the hospital for a couple of days. And they were telling me again that if I didn't have these surgeries first, they would be taking my legs and I'd likely, die within about 6 months. And I said,
God.
and I left AMA against medical advice and I walked out of the hospital. This was
Mm.
87, not knowing where I was going to go. And
Mhm.
this is where this idea of healing really started coming in more. I'd had some experience and already started doing some meditation and all of that, but I started getting sober. I stopped doing all those things that were also affecting me. But I ended up in a place called the Pritikin Longevity Center, which was in Santa Monica on the beach, kind of by the Santa Monica Pier. And when I got there, I was still on a cane. I could walk about 10 feet on the cane and holding the wall at the same time. So
Jeez.
I was still in bad shape. But the doctor there, instead of what my other vascular guys were saying up in Portland, they were telling me in Portland that when it hurts, to stop walking, rest, and all this. Doctor down there said, no. He says,
Mhm.
what I want you to do, says, I want you to go out on the boardwalk and just start walking pretty much all day long, as much as you can go. And so I would go out there, I'd walk 10, 12 feet. Then I'd walk 12, 14 feet. Then I'd walk 15 feet. And to be quite honest with you, I was inspired by being on that boardwalk.
Mhm.
Sunny day, Southern
Mhm.
California, between Santa Monica, Marina Del Rey down there. And there's a lot of women on rollerblades and bikinis. And it's just like, I did not want to be the 97-pound weakling on the beach, right? I was
Mhm.
going to stand tall, right? And I was 30 pounds underweight at the time.
Mhm.
I was in, so the doctor, the Pritikin Center was a plant-based diet. So he
Okay.
said, eat as much food as you want. You don't have to diet. Eat as much food as you want and walk. Within
Mhm.
2 weeks, I was walking 2 miles. And as you
That is
know,
incredible.
with claudication and you start walking and you start moving, you start to build collateral blood vessels, right?
Right.
So I started to build the collaterals and it also started cleaning out my arteries. And so
Mhm.
it's just like my self-esteem that I'd started suffering with, especially as a little kid, started getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And my confidence started shifting. So
Mhm.
essentially what that doctor said, and I had this happen to me 3 times in my life. That first doctor at the Pritikin Center says, don't worry about it. Just go out on the boardwalk and walk. Don't worry about it. Walk. It's just like I'd never heard that before because the doctor is saying, worry about it, stop, you might lose your legs. So 360-degree thinking, or 180
Mhm.
degrees, or however many degrees, a lot of
Mhm.
it.
And once again, I have to give credit to that doctor that told you that, and just to highlight things, just with all of the people that I've had on the show, and even through my own personal experience, our bodies have an incredible ability to heal themselves. They want to heal themselves. It's sometimes when we get in the way of people telling us, don't do that, you're going to get hurt, this is going to make it worse, blah, 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 blah. If you listen to that and you follow that advice, once again, it's almost like a victimization or, a victim mentality, rather than being able to say, no, I got this. If I get out there, I go walk on the beach, on the boardwalk, see
Yep.
all those good looking women, and just smelling the salt air and the sun and listening to the sound of the surf, what could be more healing than that, except
Yeah.
going to the mountains?
Yeah. And it's interesting, and I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but when you look at the history of medicine and the activity like beach activity, we never used to go to the beach. So like the late 1800s, early 1900s, nobody went to the beach and
Right.
hung out at the beach until, some doctors started saying, go sit on the beach to help heal yourself. So people started going to the beaches to actually heal themselves. And then
Mm-hmm.
the beaches became more popular over the last 100 years to what it is now. But it didn't start out like that. It started out as a place to go heal.
Mm-hmm. I feel that same way about the mountains, because I love being in the mountains. Of course, at the foot of the Rocky Mountains, what could be better? But it just being there, It just fills you with such a sense of peace and well-being, just smelling the air and feeling that cool mountain air on your face. It's just so therapeutic.
Yeah. And I live in the mountains today, so I hear
Yeah.
that. And yeah.
And the contrast of that being outside, either at the beach, in the mountains, even walking in the park, as opposed to being in a facility where they're going to fix you.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, it just really messes with your mind.
Yeah, very much
and your
so.
health.
And it is a victimization when we turn over our power. And what I heard you say earlier. You know,
exactly.
like,
So now
yeah,
let's go. When did you start the yoga then? Because now you're on the beach, you know, walking 2 miles, you're tossing the cane aside, you know, you're turning into Superman, and all of the women on the beach are just flocking to you. Okay, so now what happens then?
Wow, that's a great picture. I'm going to have to go back down there again. At the Pritikin Center, they had a yoga class. It was really more of a gentle stretching class because most of the people at the Pritikin Center couldn't move very well.
Okay.
So it was a gentle stretching class, and it was the first time I was exposed to yoga. But it's just like, wow, this is kind of cool. I kind of like this. So when I went back to Portland, I kept up my walking. I joined a gym, and I was doing the Stairmaster and that, and doing some of the gym activities and starting to lift a little bit. But they also had a yoga class there. I thought, oh, I'll go in there. So I kind of drifted into that class, and it was a really great class. It was just like general vinyasa type yoga, and then the teacher at the end did candle gazing. And it's just like, I loved it. You know, this is 87. This is a long time ago. And I loved going to the gym. I kept doing the yoga. And then I started looking up yoga studios in Portland. There wasn't too many at the time, back in the 80s. I mean, they're everywhere now. But at the time, and I ended up going to somebody named Diane Wilson, which is a general hatha yoga. And she followed some, you know, spiritual masters from India, and some guy named Paramahansa Yogananda, and which I know who that is now. But, and I just kept diving more into it. I started doing what's called Ashtanga yoga, and really enjoyed the Ashtanga practice a lot. Studied with somebody named David Swenson and Nancy Gilgoff, and some of the real early Ashtanga teachers in the country. And it was just like, this is it. This is my yoga. This is where I'm going to be the rest of my life. But I got to tell you, it's not where I've been the rest of my life. And I ended up a hot yoga studio, a Bikram studio, opened in '93 in Portland, and I went to it. And at first, I didn't like it because it was hot and it was sweaty and stupid, right? Nobody does yoga like this. You know, and so I was going back and forth between the Ashtanga and the Bikram, but I started feeling different. And by 97, and in Ashtanga, you're doing a lot of downward dog and what they call jump throughs, where you're jumping through your legs, and started getting a lot of pain in my wrist and a lot of pain in my shoulder. And I went to a sports medicine doc in 97, and he wanted to do surgery on my shoulder. And yeah, none of it, you know, more surgery. Nope, not going to happen. But I went back to the Bikram yoga, and I did it every day for 30 days. I wasn't doing any Ashtanga at all, just the Bikram. And my shoulder pain went away. And I thought, wow, isn't this interesting? And I still had some pain in my legs. It wasn't totally gone. But, you know, I'd get 1, 2, maybe some days it would be a 3. It wasn't like 7s or 8s as far as a pain level, or 10s. But I thought that I was going to live with some level of pain the rest of my life. So in 98, Bikram was doing a training, and I didn't want a teacher training. I didn't really, you know, want to become a teacher. I went because I wanted to heal my body. And so I went down there. I was down there for 11 weeks in the training that he was doing at the time. And within about 2 weeks, all the pain in my legs were gone. And let me tell you something. This is the second time I heard it, because I went to Bikram and I said, what do I do to modify this posture? Because my leg hurts. My left leg hurts in this posture. And he said, Michael, don't worry about it. Forget about it. Just do the yoga. And I was mad. I wanted my money back. And he said, no, you're not going to get it back. He says,
You actually asked for it?
oh, yeah, absolutely.
Jeez.
And he just said, Michael, don't worry about it. Forget about it. But I didn't hear that.
Right.
Right. But it said about 2 weeks later again, it's just like there's something about this 2 week thing that's happened to me in my life several times. We were practicing twice a day, 4 to 6 hours a day of yoga, just constant. And then yoga in between that. But I started coming to this posture. It's called standing head to knee. And you're standing on one leg, you're kicking the other leg out, you bring your elbows down, and you bring your forehead to your knee. Well, that was hurting my leg so much, my left leg. My right leg is okay, but my left leg was hurting. And then one day as I'm coming into the posture, I realized that I didn't have any pain in my left leg. And I kept coming into the posture and I just held the posture. And it was just like, I could just feel like everything being released. I had tears in my eyes, I was crying, and I had no more pain. And it was gone. So I started listening the whole rest of the training. Again, don't worry about it, forget about it, just do the yoga.
And you never asked for your money back again?
No, I didn't.
So now, then you went on to become a yoga teacher, and you actually opened up several studios, didn't you?
Yes, within about a week after that training, I was teaching. Again, it wasn't my intention to teach. I'd made a lot of money in the mid-90s doing some options trading, and I'd taken a couple of years off and went back to Portland. And, I was asked, hey, you want to teach, and your yoga will be for free. And I said, oh, okay. So I started teaching. I loved it. Within a year, I had my first studio in Portland. It's still there after all these years, and it's made it through all the ups and downs and COVID and everything else. And then I opened a studio here in Bend, Oregon. And I opened that studio in '04, the early '04, and it's still operating. I ended up selling it. I still teach there. But also in between, I was teacher 100 in the Bikram world. And I also led about 30 teacher trainings. So I've helped train about 7,000 teachers all over the world. I started a company and I shut it down in COVID called Yoga Business Expert, where I was also doing business coaching for yoga studios all around the world. So I'm heavily involved, and I'm not going to say very much about it. I just briefly mentioned this, but have a book coming out in April on yoga, and it's going to be really, really great. I'm just going to say that.
This is a perfect segue then, because I thought this was just, it just really tickled me. The name of your studio is Bend Yoga.
Yes.
And I just love that little play on words. Because I know it's Bend, Oregon, but it's like, yoga, Bend. I just thought that was really, it was very gitchy, something I definitely remembered or stuck in my mind. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, I love the term heavily meditated.
Yeah.
So could you address that and kind of explain to the audience what you mean by heavily meditated? Because it sounds actually pretty yummy.
Yeah. I came to the idea of meditation somewhat organically, I'll say. I didn't really understand it. And it's interesting because, and I mentioned my late brother before our call, before we started, my late brother Bill started something called Centerpoint Research Institute and what they call holosync, which is meditation using music and binaural beats. You're using headphones and all this. So my brother was really one of the early pioneers of that technology. And he had set up there's somebody out there called Master Charles. Master Charles had passed, but he had something called synchronicity, which is still there. So my brother helped develop the meditation
Wow.
programs in the 80s there, and then started Centerpoint. So my point is that here I have my brother, which is really recognized around the world for meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And here I am doing yoga. My brother didn't do much yoga, and I didn't do much meditation as such,
Mm-hmm.
other than within yoga,
Mm-hmm.
right? And learning to calm the mind. And there's countless experiences I can relate to you, but one of them, the studio that I studied in originally with Bikram, is at Wilshire and Robertson in Los Angeles. And right around the corner was a fire department. And I mentioned to him one day, and I said, it's too bad there's all this street noise and the fire trucks going by all the time. He says, oh, much better for meditation. He says, if you can meditate and calm your mind with the noise, you can do it anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So I started really understanding that concept a little bit more, that yes, today I meditate, sit all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate the calmness when I'm sitting in, a noiseless environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yet trying to calm your mind within noise is different.
Mm-hmm.
Allowing that monkey mind to be still. But even a couple days ago, I was in meditation and my mind was very active. And meditation doesn't mean ceasing of thoughts.
Right.
And you still got to have thoughts, right? It's more about the awareness, developing more awareness. And for whatever reason, there was a lot of stuff turning around in my mind a couple days ago. And the impression I got, this visualization I got, is that it was like a grizzly bear chasing a wild horse that he wanted to eat. Because, bears will do that. They will chase wild horses for food, right? And so here I am a couple days ago in meditation having that thought. Did I stun you?
Well, because it's like, of course, that bears will chase wild horses. And I'm sitting there going, I'm a city girl.
Yeah.
I mean, not a deep, but, love getting out in the mountains and all that stuff. But no, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I found that interesting that was what popped into your mind, because as you were talking and I was still processing in my monkey mind, the noise from the fire trucks and stuff. And I was thinking, man, if you can calm your mind with all of that going on in the background and to be able to focus on just the here and the now and to go inside yourself, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say control, it is, I guess, some sort of self-control, but not to the point where it's like, rigid stubbornness.
Yeah.
It's just having that flexibility. You can go, okay, I hear those engines. I hear the street traffic. I'm coming back to a calm place.
It's the idea of release and relax.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to the book on yoga. But before we talk about that, because there is your first book, and that was Falling Down and Getting Up. And I would imagine you sound like you're pretty much a master at it.
I guess if you the falling down part, falling down.
Yeah. Well, I think all of us are pretty good at the falling down part.
Yeah.
And we can all relate to that, because how many of us haven't fallen on our face more, times than we want to admit. It's the getting up part.
It's like, yeah.
So tell us about the getting up part.
Well, the book, the first part of the book is really that first 30 years. That all those falling downs, whether it's a water skiing accident, near-death experience, the drinking, the vascular disease, all of those things have really influenced myself in my early life. And then the next part is, what did I do to get out of that? What changed? And so the next part of the book is really more about yoga, my journey with yoga, my journey with learning to calm my mind, the don't worry about it, forget about it. And over the years, I've recognized that even like with yoga, it's not like a particular structure of a posture where I learned the most, or let's do this great bow pose, or whatever posture it might be. My biggest single lesson in getting up is don't worry about it, forget about it, just do the yoga. Because I didn't want to, forget about it. I wanted to worry about it. But it was those exact things that were contributing to my nature, my health, and my disease, and all those different things. And as I made the decision to go into a different direction, rather than always being back here and worrying about it, I just went a different direction. Oh, you mean there's another way?
Right. I think that is such an important point, and thank you for bringing it up. Fear and worry is so detrimental to our health, not just our mental health, but our physical health and well-being. And even as a medical person, it took me years to really appreciate how stress, the impact that it has on the body in a physiological way. It's not just, we would always stress kills. Well, okay, a little more information, please. And then when you realize what's happening on a physiological basis, then it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And then it's easier to recognize that, that connection and to do something about it.
Yeah, most hospitals today are saying about 90% of their admissions are stress related. 90%, not
That's
9%,
incredible.
not 1%, but 90% of the ailments that hospitals admit for are stress related health conditions. That's huge.
Isn't that amazing? And then, of course, oftentimes the medical profession or Western medicine will help treat that stress with pharmaceuticals.
Oh, very much.
Yeah. So how
And
wonderful that we have a natural way of doing it.
yeah, and let me make a little shout out for something, and it's called the PPDA, the Psychophysiological Disorder Association, and a guy named Dr. David Clark, and we're doing a big presentation here in Bend in the end of January. He's over in Portland, one of the top mind-body guys in the country, and he grew up as a gastroenterologist, went to Stanford, and he's associate professor of ethics at OHSU today, and he started this organization. And part of what he is working on right now is changing the diagnostic process that most doctors use in this country, because it's basically based on physical and structural issues, and without a lot of mind body diagnostics. So he's going around the country teaching a new diagnostic system that includes that mind body interplay. What is really going on with this patient that has gastro issues? What is really going on with this patient that has acne? I mean, like in this movie, All the Rage, I mean, there are dermatologists that will tell you that 6 weeks before a woman gets married is often a time where they will see a woman because they're breaking out in acne because they're about ready to get married. But they think it's like just like this acne stuff, and so they want to clear it out. So, the dermatologists that understand that relationship can then help them move through their jitters of getting married to release that expression that's coming out as acne. Again, we can dive so deep into this. We can talk all this. Yeah.
I really love that, the mind-body connection and looking at that rather than, and what I heard so many times in my lifetime, it's all in your head.
Yeah.
Well, of course it's in your head, because there is that relationship of the, neurology and, the nervous system to what's happening inside your body. So again, when I understood that, a lot of things changed for me. But there's nothing worse than somebody saying to you, oh, it's all in your head.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And you cannot separate the mind and the body.
I don't even like the terminology of mind body, it says mind body, because it seems to indicate that they're two different things.
Right.
And they're really not. I mean, they're just like this.
Mm-hmm.
Let me mention something, and perhaps some of the listeners have heard of this, what's called the ACE study. The ACE study is the Adverse Childhood Experience Study.
Yes.
In the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, very large study that went back to take a look at adverse experiences that children had pre 5, 6 years old, and what was going on with them much later in life. And they started correlating, incidences of these adverse experiences as a 3 or 4-year-old with somebody that has back pain when they're 40, or other, just every condition you can possibly imagine. So it's beginning to become aware of those experiences that actually are influencing our bodies today. And when you really dive into the mind body work, and like what Dr. Clark does, and Andrew Weil and Dr. Sarno, and so many of the mind bodies go say, these things are all connected. And if we really look at it and become aware of it and understand it, we can begin to release this. Even as myself as a yoga teacher, when I use it in yoga, I've seen people's back pain go away overnight that they've had for 10 or 20 years. And it's normal. And this is number 3, where Dr. Sarno used to say, don't worry about it. Just go live your life. It says nothing's wrong with you. Right?
Right.
And so the thing about like a lot of like the idea of releasing pain, it was sometimes we don't need to necessarily understand why that pain came. There are some conditions and abusive situations where people need extra support or therapy to release it. But for the most part, once we understand the mechanism of the release, we can just release it. So like even myself, time to time I come up with back pain and I go, oh, that's like TMS. Oh, okay, I'm just going to let it go. Within a day, it's gone. Right? But I don't have to like overanalyze it.
Right. Because if you overanalyze it, you're going back to the worrying about it, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Well, now there's another aspect of what you do and your life that we haven't talked about yet. And that is that you actually, well, you're so big into storytelling, and you actually help authors, entrepreneurs, and speakers fine-tune their message so they can share their stories and bring their unique qualities to the world.
Yeah, I've really found, Cheryl, over the years that I'm really good at helping people get their stories out. And a lot of it came from the teacher trainings that I was leading and teaching yoga teachers how to get up and speak. And I'll give one example. I've got a multitude of them, but I'll give one example. The individual, we were doing a training in Acapulco for 9 weeks, and he was a forensic psychiatrist out of the federal prison system. So this was back in 2008. And I had actually known him before because I was doing a lot of workshops on the East Coast, and he would come and be the quiet guy in the back of the room. And he came and he wasn't really able to get up and teach. He wasn't able to like teach a class. So as we started breaking down who he was as a forensic psychiatrist, I would say, Ralph, I said, when you're in prison, do you ever talk to groups of prisoners? He says, yeah. And I said, do you ever talk to them one-on-one? Yeah. I said, well, what do you talk to them about? Oh, mental health and these different things. I said, well, what if you take those same skills you already have and deliver this particular message as a yoga teacher, to this group of students, of these 50 students? And literally overnight, he went from not being able to stand in front of the room to being this very active, almost overactive teacher, because he recognized that he already had the skills needed to do the next thing that he wanted to do in his life. And again, I have multitude of examples like that, but it's really taking our story and being able to deliver it. The other thing I'll mention, and you probably have had this experience too, I know I did, is back in first, second grade, it was something called show and tell.
Show and tell.
And I call it a sneaky way that teachers had to help us do speaker training. Because we'd get up and we'd say, oh, I did this over the weekend, I did that. So again, as a little kid, we already had the skills to get up in front of people and to deliver whatever we were going to deliver, tell them whatever we wanted to tell them. But as adults, you know, as we go into adults, many people will go, oh, well, you can't do that. Oh, fear of public speaking is the #1 fear, and all this other kind of stuff. It's just like, well, we already know how to do it. We learned how to do it as a kid. So what if we take that same skill and apply it here on a stage? You already know show and tell skills. You've got it. So that there's another example. I had a client that hired me earlier this year. She has 26 #1 best-selling books. And she felt like she didn't know how to deliver her story. She's a great author. She could help other people with books, all these other things, but she didn't know how to get out this story about who she is and what she does. You know, so those are just like a couple of examples. My premise, and I'm going to mention this again, is coming back to this idea that we already have whatever we need to get on stage, to write a book, to do a podcast, and to be in the media, whatever it might be. It's just understanding the skills that we already have and applying them.
I think that fear plays such a huge part, and it's so paralyzing because it's almost like, well, what if I fail? Well, you know, okay, I've done that before and nothing terrible happened. Or, you know, what if I look silly? Oh, well, that ship has sailed too. I've already done that and, you know, managed to survive. When you think of the terrible things that can happen to you if you try to write a book, start a podcast, get on stage, you think about the worst thing that can happen, those things really aren't that bad in the great big scheme of things. But you think about if you never do it, if you never find that you know, inner strength to say, I'm going to do it, look at all the wonderful opportunities you're going to miss out on.
Yeah, and there's another friend of mine, Tommy Baylor, and he wrote a book called What You Want Wants You. And so I feel like if there's like this calling that's saying, hey, get up and get on this podcast, get up and go do this, get up and go do that, it's because something is knocking on us. But it takes awareness to understand that. So those ideas that we have, I mean, like I heard you say, yeah, you know, okay, somebody's going to throw tomatoes on me on stage. Well, it doesn't happen very often, right? Or, you know, most of the fear comes from projection and fear of the future. Like, what if that happens? So, and when we're thinking that way, and it's all normal to think that way, we're living in the future, right? Or we're living in the past from a past experience rather than living here now. So like even in teaching yoga, and especially with adults, we live in the future, we live in the past. Yoga helps people come back to the present. Where a little kid lives pretty much in the present and doesn't care about the future or the past. They have an argument with one of their friends, and 12 seconds later, they're hugging and they're friends again. As adults, if we get in an argument about how to make an egg, we don't talk to somebody for 30 years. Right? I mean, just like silly stuff.
I'm sorry, that's hilarious because it's so true.
Yeah.
And I could actually even think of a couple of situations off the top of my head. It's like, well, we don't talk anymore, and it was because of this one stupid thing. That's pretty funny. So, Michael, where can people find you?
I only send people to one place. Make it easy. michaelbharris.com. That's it. I'm going to throw something else out. I don't do this in all the past, or all the podcasts I'm on, but I want to mention this. michaelbharris.com/book. BOOK. So you can put that in the show notes too. And if somebody wants to go there, they can download a free copy of my Falling Down, Getting Up book.
Wow.
Yeah. And, of course, they can buy it at any bookstore,
Mhm.
Amazon, or wherever, anywhere online, anywhere somebody wants to buy a book. But if they go there, they can download a free copy of it if they want to.
Okay. And then the book on yoga should be out when?
Well, there is some yoga in this book.
I
But
figured.
the other book, and again, I'm not going to tell you too much about it other than it will be out in April.
I won't tell anybody. My lips are sealed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Well,
talked to the person, I will mention this. I talked to one of my teachers in the last couple of days in India. I gave them a call and asked them to forward the book.
mhm.
So it's going to be a book that the reason that I wanted to do the book, and there's some other authors that I brought into the book too, is because we're at such a crossroads in the world today. And there's a lot of energy bouncing around in the universe right now.
Yes,
and in
there
our
is.
atmosphere.
Yeah.
There's all these different things going on out there, whether it's politics or conflicts or make the list. Don't worry
Mhm.
about it, forget about it. You can make those lists. And
Mhm.
I believe that the more that we are able to connect with people, and this is what I love about what you do in your podcast,
Mhm.
you have these incredible guests, all these transformational stories. And if we're
Mhm.
able to connect on a new basis, we're going to be able to live a healthier, happier life. And perhaps we can start to shift some of the energy in the world,
Mhm.
to bring this connection back together. And I believe through stories, whether it's talking about water skiing accidents or show and tell in second grade or whatever it might
Mhm.
be, and being able to get clear about our stories, what they really are, and to share them, we are going to connect with each other. Because it's been done ever since the
Mhm.
beginning of man. When the caveman came home with the dinosaur, say, look what I got for dinner.
Mhm.
Right? And tell him the story.
And I really believe that by doing that, we can make the world a better place. Sharing our stories, telling our stories, and listening to each other could make a huge difference.
Well, think globally, act locally. This is as
Mhm.
local as it gets ourselves,
Right,
right?
right.
What can we do locally right here and now to be happier ourselves and to live a better life? Not just for us, but for each other.
Mhm. Okay, so can I ask you a favor?
You can ask me anything. I may not
Okay.
answer it, but you can
Well,
ask me anything.
okay. Well, once the book is published,
Yep.
would you come back on the show and tell us a little bit more about the book? But then it will be out and you can kind of give us a little bit more insight into what it is. I know you don't want to say too much about it now, but you can promote it and tell us more about it, and then we can help change the world.
I would love to. Thank you
Okay.
for asking. Yes, very
Certainly.
much so. I appreciate it.
And thank you so much for being on the show. This has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So much fun.
Yeah, good.
And
Me
I
too.
learned a lot.
Yeah.
Do you have just one final little pearl of wisdom or one last thing you want to leave that the audience can kind of mull over a little bit? Well, you've already given us an awful lot to think about, which is great. So
Yeah,
thank you.
I'll throw something else out. And this is, I mentioned that we already have what we need to do, right? Or we've
Mhm.
already learned everything. And my mother taught me how to breathe. And the reason that I say that is because when I was a little kid and I ran up to the back door because the local bully was chasing me and it hit me. And I go up to the back door and mom says, what's wrong? What's wrong? Well, what did she say? And what do mothers intuitively say? Michael, just breathe, take a deep breath and just calm down. So
Mhm.
that deep breath that moms teach us what to do immediately changes our central nervous system and it
Mhm.
immediately changes our mind and relaxes us. So what I would say is remember what mom taught you about breathing.
Excellent. I just got a deep breath.
Yeah.
I feel better now.
See? Just takes one breath.
One breath. We can change the world with one breath.
Yeah, we can.
Well, Michael, thanks again for being on the show. I really, really appreciate it. You're awesome.
Thank you again, Cheryl.
And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you as well. And do check out Michael's excuse me, his website, and check out his book and connect with him. And just remember that one breath can calm you down. And if we all just stop, take a breath, I think we can make the world a better place. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.